Howdy, 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 and welcome to Talking Synths, number 57, I think we're on, right?
Wow.
It's going to get higher than we can count soon. I'm Sam because it says so on my shirt, thanks to Lana who gave me this Christmas present. He's Carlos because of what it says on his shirt.
Yeah.
And we're from Synthar, it says so on his shirt. And we just released a Synth Wizards episode on string machines called String Machine Madness. If you haven't seen it yet, check it out on YouTube. And because of that, we've been doing a lot of string machine stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be a good topic to talk about more in a technical sense and kind of get into the guts of them a little bit, because string machines and synthesizers seem to be the same.
There's definitely some overlap.
Yeah. I think a lot of people will think of them as the same thing, but they're inherently totally different. Well, not totally, but inherently a lot different. So I thought we'd kind of chat about the differences there and what that means as far as upkeep or repairs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you know, I remember, I think it was one of our first episodes, we had someone who asked, you know, are there any sleeper synths out there, or, you know, just gear that tends to be slept on? And I vividly remember saying, you know, Crumar Orchestrator. And I think vintage string machines in general, you know, get kind of slept on. You do lose a little bit of some of that control over like every single parameter.
Yeah.
But what you get back for in character alone, like in spades, totally makes up for it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of the position right now, you know, where I've been collecting synthesizers for a little bit. I think if I had a choice between like a vintage analog poly and a vintage string machine, I'd probably go string machine.
I'd have a hard time with that, but at the same time, when you say that, I think back in like the moment that I had the most fun playing in filming that episode was pulling out that poly Ensemble S.
Yeah.
And I hit one chord, and Lucas was there, and it's like, man, that sounds like Clockwork Orange, doesn't it? And he pulled up on his phone the YouTube of the Wendy Carlos music, and so we got the chords and played it. Man, that was dead on and so fun. And exactly what you say, it has such character to it. And most string machines are basically one-trick ponies, but they sure do that trick nicely.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about string machines too, that we talked about with Jason Schwartzman at the end of the episode, they don't really sound like strings. I mean, they were the best they had at the time back in the 70s. But then samplers came along, you know, synthesizers could, with a lot more voice control, could get a lot closer, but they have a magic of their own, just like drum machines. I mean, I remember when when a bandmate bought a TR-808 about 100 years ago so we could record and have drums, because you know, you couldn't afford to get a real drummer and all the mics in the studio and all. It sounded like crap as far as drums go, and he probably kept it a couple of years and then sold it. But
sold it for $50.
Yeah, but you know, TR-808 and most drum machines, people buy them for their character, for their unique sounds, and I think the same with string machines.
Yeah, I remember watching a promo video many years ago for Pro Tools. It was like some M-Audio DVD bundle, and they were talking to a producer, and he was talking about, you know, first getting his hands on a synthesizer in the studio. And you know how they have different preset patches? And how a lot of the other producers at the time, you know, they'd hit the string patch or the flute patch or the violin patch is probably the most specific one that I can think of, and say they'd recoil and say, oh, that sounds nothing like a violin. You know, but for him, it was the joy of having something new that sounded different.
Yeah.
Because like if I wanted a violin player, I'd bring in a session musician. You know, I'd bring in a studio musician. I could get a violin player if I wanted, but this is something that's different.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of always stuck with me. You know.
Yeah. And for the string machines, not only do string machines in general have that charm and character, but each of them has their own.
Oh yeah.
I just had such fun, comparing the Selena to the Poly Ensemble S, to the Freeman, to the Elka Twin, and I just love each and every one of them.
Yeah,
and they're all very different.
And this episode did take us quite a long time. I think it was probably over the course of a year, and
that multi-box clip is like 4 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
But that wasn't shot with this in mind. But
so I mean, we really got to sample a wide variety of string machines, and some of them that weren't even on our list. They weren't even on our radar per se, but fortune smiled upon us, and like the Poly Ensemble coming across one of those, and then the Paraphonic, the 505. That's another one that just totally blew me away. Just totally blew me away.
Yeah. And VP 330 vocoder, and so many of them we didn't even have a chance to. I mean, there were so many that got left out because either we didn't have them, or B, didn't have time to really get into them. But
the one I would have loved to have for the episode would have been a Korg Trident.
Yeah,
that would. I've been after one of those for a while now, just to hear one in person. But even across, maybe say the same line, having different revisions, I was surprised at how much sonically different, these two instruments could be. For me, the orchestrator, and the performer. That's
one I was going to mention, the two.
So there's a Mark I and a Mark II, and in the Mark I, the bass section is divide down. And so you have full polyphony, but then in the Mark II, it's SSM based, and it's duophonic. And I really preferred the Mark II. Like, just something about like the round warmth of that bottom end on the Performer. If I ever get one, I'll be looking for a Mark II.
And when you said orchestrator and performer, I was thinking of the orchestrator should kind of have the same string sound as a performer, but they don't. They're very different. And the performer has the 3 graphic EQ knobs. And, oh man, that's the magic with that. So
I'm a sucker for anything with a fixed filter bank, really, or any form of. I think EQ can be very important, and when it comes to sculpting a sound, especially if it's before the filter or after the filter. The Tisco 110F is one that I've been after for a while too, and that one's got the cool little fixed frequency filter bank on the end of the signal chain. But the Korg Delta has that EQ section as well, and it just really helps to dial in sounds, And let's say you want to crank the resonance, but you don't want that high end whistle, and then you can kind of tame it back a little bit and then boost in that low end, because you're kind of thinking of circuits that are kind of in their early inception, so there's some limitation with them. Some of these especially early string machines, they're not going to have Q compensation for your filter, but there's more than one way to skin a cat.
But you're talking about setting the EQ to get what you want, and for me, it's all about playing the EQ, and I could just sustain one chord and play those sliders and change the timbre like that, and have more fun than humans should be allowed to have.
So I guess, in talking of that, some of the limitations of this earlier, technology, you had mentioned maintenance and upkeep and what to expect. Right off the bat, very, very few string machines are going to have MIDI.
Yeah.
You can kiss the MIDI goodbye. There are some retrofit kits. I can't think of the company off the top of my head, but I know that there is one company that manufactures MIDI retrofit kits for certain string machines. So that would be pretty interesting to try out.
Yeah. And then some string machines, you actually have to tailor your playing to them because they're paraphonic. Like the I guess it was the Performer we were showing that on in the Synth Wizards episode.
The attack of the envelope.
Yeah, you play one note, and that triggers the envelope because it is paraphonic. The subsequent notes you play as long as you're holding that first one down, they don't re-trigger the envelope. So if you got a kind of sound, and then you play the next note, and you're already on filtering down, you're not even really going to hear the others come in. So yeah, you really got to adjust your playing to that. So it's a different kind of beast. And then technically the differences between string machines and synthesizers. Synthesizers usually have one oscillator, two oscillators, three oscillators, like if we're talking a monophonic synth or whatever per voice. And then with a string machine, you usually have a master oscillator, which then goes through a top octave synthesizer chip. So let's say you have a master oscillator that plays a high C note, then you send it to this top octave synth chip, and it takes that high C and spits out C sharp, D sharp, E, all from that one note. And then so now you have an octave of 12 notes playing, and then you use divide down chips to get the lower octaves of each of those notes. So basically you have one oscillator driving the whole string machine. And the advantage of that is all of those notes you can play at once. So so you can take both arms and go on the keyboard.
Play every single note.
Yeah. Whereas you're not, with a synthesizer, you're limited by the polyphony of it. So there's some give and take there. And so a lot of times on a string machine, when you're getting into problem areas, as far as something breaking, it's not working right, you might lose all the D's at once. Every note on the keyboard plays except none of the D's play. And so that's a good indicator that
your top octave.
Yeah, either the top octave synth chip is not working on that D, it's spitting out every note but the D's, or maybe the divide down chips are not working. So it's a little different to go after and tackle problems on those.
And then, another thing, talking about, technical limitations, don't expect your noise floor to be 0. For the most part, these instruments aren't very quiet as far as background noise, and especially that's kind of the charm of the chorus, the bucket brigade and the phasing.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of these use BBD chorus effects and phasers and whatnot to kind of liven the sound and make it more ensemble-y, and those circuits were inherently kind of noisy. And especially as some of those chips age, like the MN 3009 chips, one in particular, as they age, they start getting noisier and noisier, and then they might just fail. But
and so one thing we had kind of done a little bit of research on here in the shop was when we were servicing these instruments, it became pretty apparent that the top octave generators and the divide down chips are pretty susceptible to, if you have any kind of voltage spikes, if you have failing voltage regulators, and then especially just capacitors that are on their way out to the power supply. And this happened on more than one occasion, where we would fix an instrument, it would sit in the showroom for some time, let's maybe say a week or two with us turning it on every day, and then the top octave or the divide down chips would go out.
Yeah.
And that was usually in a case where the power supply had not been rebuilt. So as a good, just safety precaution and just good safety measure, rebuilding the power supply, I would say is pretty critical when it comes to vintage string machines. Especially with the rarity of some of those chips.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So what do you do if something like that goes out?
Hop on eBay. Or, the other thing too, though, is nowadays with microcontrollers, people are starting to remanufacture those top octave generators. Flat Keys out of the UK is one that I know of that can do custom ICs. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so if you go to their website, it'll show you they obviously have a very a passion for string machines. So it'll show you every string machine that they support. But then if there's one that's not on their list, but the specs of the chip, they will program a chip for you.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty neat. And I've said this a million times, but if you're into making sound or noise of any kind,
Now's the time.
yeah, you're living in the golden era.
Yeah.
Oh, that chip you couldn't get for 20, 30 years? Let me just program one for
Yeah.
you.
Let me do a one-off.
Yeah.
But a lot of the divider chips, not a lot, but some of them we have stock of.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, if you need those, check Syntaur.com.
Mm-hmm. And then it's always interesting to see where the overlap is in different technologies, because some of those divide down chips were used in string machines, but then they were also used like in organs.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a lot of crossover between organs and string machines.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one thing we talked about in the episode, Ken Freeman, who built the Freeman String Symphonizer, which kind of put the whole world into motion in string machines. He based his design off organ divide down circuitry, so, and everyone kind of followed suit. So.
Now, I would love to see a modern day string machine. I don't know if we, and I had kind of been championing the return of the Romplers, and I laughed because it probably never happened. One, because RAM and ROM is so cheap nowadays.
Yeah.
But Roland just released the JD08, which is the JD800 in the boutique form factor, and it's bitimbral, has analog trigger in, extended polyphony, and I'm like, that's the thing I've been after, So now I'm like, can we get a modern day string machine that uses? I would want it'd have to be divide down.
So what's the Waldorf one?
It's digital.
Okay.
It's the Strikefet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one sounds great too. That one sounds great, but to have an analog divide down, the technology's there. Just someone who's not me has to be passionate enough to put it all together in one package.
Would you be able to get enough of the parts to do a divide down?
Yeah, I think you could. Well, it's. I mean, if money's no object.
Well, but
yeah.
I mean, if quantities, can you get enough of the chips you need?
Yeah. See, so like I was saying with Flat Keys, how they program and remanufacture these chips, if you could get on the manufacturing end of it and then use that to subsidize putting out a product and making, But then of course that gets into, then you have to have firmware that runs everything. So now you're in the software and the hardware business.
Yeah.
During a pandemic.
when the Chinese chip factory is burned down and shipping can't go anywhere.
Just quadruples in price. But yeah, a modern day string machine with polyphonic aftertouch. You have to throw in polyphonic aftertouch.
Now, what would the aftertouch do on a string machine? I mean, it'd be cool to add some subtle vibrato or something. But
yeah, you know what I'm a real big fan of.
But then, are you getting away from the string machine?
And then it's a whole new product.
Yeah.
I really like on which instrument is it? I was working on an instrument the other day. Oh, it was the Emax 2. Yeah, I've been going through a whole bunch of Emax 2s. We have a few rack units and keyboard versions, and kind of putting them through their paces and getting them ready for the showroom. But one thing that I really liked was key velocity can be mapped to resonance.
Oh, that's neat.
And so that that it just those subtleties that they kind of change the texture of a sound depending on how hard you play.
Yeah.
And so some of these string machines do have some real subtle filtering, or you can tailor in sound. So if you could map, like you were saying, like how you like to play the EQ. What if your polyphonic aftertouch went to the EQ?
Yeah,
and you could move the sliders by how hard you were pressing. I think it's totally doable.
Yeah. Or it'd be cool to have something in software or hardware that essentially moved those sliders that did the digital graphic EQ dance. Yeah.
I'm a real big fan of looping envelopes, and that's one thing that I really like to see on the Summit, how they made the envelopes loopable just with the press of a button from the front panel. So
nice.
Give me a string machine with looping envelopes, Q compensation and polyphonic aftertouch, MIDI, maybe some CV and gate just for kicks. I think it'd be great.
So yeah, we got summits, we got peaks. Talk about kind of new things happening, and those are new things for us to finally have those in the showroom. And that Summit sounds great.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to spend a whole lot of time with it, but the little bit of time that I have had.
Same. I mean, I just went through some presets and thought, ooh, nice.
I had, for about we've been in this building for about a year, and this whole year we've had the Quantum, and that's kind of been the piece that I pull everyone to when they walk through the front door. I'm like, oh, you got to try the Quantum, but I think the Summit might be giving the Quantum a run for its money in my book, as far as what I like to show people, the first thing that draws their attention. I understand that they're two pretty different instruments as far as like how they synthesize their sound sources, but both just have great interfaces, great sound, playability, kind of ticks all those boxes for me.
And the Peak is a Summit without the keyboard.
It's 8 voices. So
and half the voices.
Yeah. So you can think of a Summit as 2 peaks in a box. Right. Yeah. And the other thing that I really liked about the Summit was just the fact that they gave you dual stereo outputs. Because it's bitimbral. So then to have a stereo output for each, I think was, that's a really smart choice. You don't see a whole lot of manufacturers giving you multiple output routing options nowadays. You're usually stuck with either mono or stereo out. And then it's got the CV input, because I have to make it a little bit weird.
I'm surprised on all the string machines how so many of them have different outputs. Here's the strings output, here's the brass output, here's the bass output.
That's what I'm telling you. It's just such a rare commodity nowadays. It's like where did all the MIDI throughs go to, and then my multiple outputs. But once going back again to the orchestrator, having your brass, your bass, and then your string out. Yeah. And then being able to spread them. On the Poly Ensemble, you have the 90-degree phase shift for your phaser outputs. You have separate outputs for your phase. I think most of the string machines that we've had multiple outputs of some sort.
Yeah. What was your favorite one of all the ones we've gone through?
Probably that Performer, that Mark II Performer, just because, and it might sound kind of like a, and it's not for the strings, but it's for the bass. It just had such a great bass sound. It really did it for me. When you have, and I think once again it goes back to not having too many options. Yeah. They give you just enough to do some basic sculpting, but you don't need to do anything outside of that, because it's like you engage the bass section and then you play it and it sounds great. Yeah,
it's such a simple, straight ahead, just. Really sounds nice in every way. Yeah. And it's a 3-trick pony. Yeah. Bass, brass, strings. But all of them with a really unique character to them. Nice sound.
And for you?
Boy, I loved that Elka Twin and the phaser on that. Oh, man. If I come across another one, I'm going to definitely snatch it up, but that's the only one I've ever seen. And then the Poly Ensemble with, I guess I'm a sucker for that slow phasing sound, and both of them have that. But the phasers on them sound so different. The Poly Ensemble is so warm and I don't really know how to describe it, but it's a totally different sound from the Elka Twin, which seemed a lot brighter and more.
To me, the Elka Twin was like thin and wispy, but like in the best way possible. Yeah. It was like
that's a good description.
That's
yeah,
the way wispy. It should sound,
Wispy and sweepy and phasey, and then the Poly Ensemble's like warm and cuddly and and still sweepy, but not at all in a wispy way.
No. Yeah, and I think with the Elka Twin, just hearing it, I don't think you would have any trouble getting it to fit in a mix. Yeah. Because as far as like it just has just the right amount of character, and it's not overwhelming. It's not going to be taking up huge frequency ranges.
Right. It's not colliding with bass and things in the mid
Yeah,
range.
yeah. You could run a drum machine behind it, and you would still hear every articulation of both parts.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do for instruments, because you're trying to hit so many nails on the head.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't make everyone happy at the same time. So that's the one thing that I like about string machines in particular. It's like, yes, they may be one-trick ponies, but what they do extremely well.
Yeah, going into this episode, I was excited because I've enjoyed playing string machines here and there, but never really got too into them in a serious way. And we had a couple in the shop, and it's like, oh, they sound good. This is we should do an episode on this, and I started getting excited about it. And then by the end of the episode, I'm like, I want to keep this one. I want to keep that one. Oh yeah, they're very charming.
Yeah. Definitely honorable mentions to the Roland Paraphonic, the 505.
Yeah.
And then really, I think the Korg EPS-1 is a pretty big sleeper.
That one kind of came in at the end of the episode, and it was like, okay, here's one that was a little later. I think it was in 1980, and most of the rest of them were in the 70s. And so here comes Korg with this, and the strings on it sounded really pretty realistic compared to a lot of the others. And you had the velocity control of the attack, and so that was real cool.
Yeah, I've seen them pop up on the Goodwill auction site, and I've almost pulled the trigger a couple of times on them.
I think you can get them for a few $100 or something.
Yeah, they're just, just fair warning, they are a little difficult to maintain because the contacts on them. It's like one of the first velocity sensitive key beds that Korg did. And so because of that, the contacts on them are very oddly shaped. The little rubber, the contact nubs, they actually have like 4 nubs. And that's what's triggering the pressure sensitivity, and those nubs fall off very easily. But I have seen MIDI retrofit kits for them. So that's I got so many pipe dreams, but that would be one of them, is a Korg EPS-1 with a MIDI on it.
And how you like the piano sounds? It.
Yeah, I think the piano, weren't they like really cheesy, or what? They didn't sound anything like a piano.
A lot of these things have piano-ish sounds built in, and they're all really cheesy. But cheese is good sometimes. I like cheese on a quesadilla and sandwich. So a lot of stuff for your sonic palette. But,
and if you haven't seen the episode, definitely give it a watch. I mean, we only touched on a small percentage of the actual string machines that are in this episode.
Yeah, we touched on a medium percentage. Oh, you mean here?
In this conversation.
But in that episode, we touched on a pretty good number of string machines. And if they interest you, dial into that. Synth Wizards 11 String Machine Madness.
And for someone who's into synthesizers, I didn't know what a string machine was till I started working here, So I think it often tends to be like a neglected, realm when it comes to synthesis.
Yeah, or you see one in a music store or with some other synthesizers, and you think, all right, that's another synthesizer. And people don't really understand the differences a lot of times. So hopefully we've shed some light on it all.
Yeah.
So, hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you enjoyed this Talking Synths. And I guess we'll call it at that. And so, until next time, we'll modulate.
Modulator.